I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Kaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and I'm just here to do a quick review of something again. I'm working on a more complex video, I swear, but right now I just want to share my thoughts on the first volume of the manga Kaiju number 8. I've seen a lot of people talking about this one. It's popped up on various forms of social media as like the Kaiju manga you need to read. And I was in the bookstore the other day, I saw that the first volume was finally there, so I thought, hey, for $10, may as well pick it up and give it a shot. Or is it 10? Yeah, $10 USA. So, knowing that this thing had a reputation already as a very popular series among Kaiju fans, I went into it figuring it must be really good. And I have to say that having read it from beginning to end, I don't get it. I don't get what people were talking about with this, because, well, I may as well go through it all in order. The premise, for those of you who don't know, is that Kaiju number 8 is the story of, what's his name? Kafka Hibino. Interesting name choice, certainly. But basically, Kafka lives in a world where giant monsters are attacking Japan, naturally, and he is technically part of the defense force, but he's not one of the guys who goes out and actually fights the monsters. He's on cleanup detail. He has to go out and help dispose of the kaiju carcasses that are left in the middle of the city after they've been taken down. And most humiliating for him, he usually gets stuck working in the bowels. One day, after a harrowing encounter with a yoju, which is like a smaller kaiju that sometimes comes along with a bigger kaiju. That sounds familiar. Anyway, one day after an encounter with one of those that lands him in the hospital, some weird thing appears in his room and forces its way inside of his mouth and turns him into this thing. And that becomes labeled Kaiju number 8 by the Defense Force. Not the most creative name, I realize, but I mean, I guess their priority is killing them rather than coming up with fancy names for them. So, Kafka isn't necessarily caught, but he does still want to figure out how to control this ability and still join the Defense Force, because he's not going to have many more chances. And, well, that's about as much plot as this first volume has to offer. Now, just up front, I think it's pretty clear that this series is inspired by 2 pre-existing works, Attack on Titan and Ultraman. And of course, Attack on Titan itself was kind of inspired by Ultraman in certain ways, but you can clearly see the influence. The whole idea of turning into a giant monster in order to fight giant monsters, that's classic Ultraman right there. But it takes a lot of details from Attack on Titan. Specifically speaking, the main character is very passionate about fighting monsters, but doesn't really have much ability to back up that passion. He always gets outclassed by the stone-cold, really cool action girl who is one of the major fighters. And in order to actually do something, the male main character gets the ability to turn into one of the very monsters that the world is being terrorized by. Now, I'm not saying that this is a blatant copy of Attack on Titan, but it is really, really close. And I'm not surprised it's that way because, you know, Attack on Titan was one of the biggest manga and then one of the biggest anime ever. But yeah, I'm not surprised that it's seeing imitators like Kaiju number 8. And perhaps that's part of what's coloring my perception, because I have to confess to you guys, I was never really into Attack on Titan. I watched the first season of the anime and I thought, hey, that was pretty good. I'll probably check the rest out at some point. But then I kept putting off checking out the rest. Every time I thought I might pick up season 2, I thought, I'll start it tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. And then eventually the show reached its end, and I started hearing word about how the conclusion for Attack on Titan was a disaster. And then I thought back and realized I never even bothered going back to rewatch the first season. When I really like an anime series, I have no problem watching it over again. I like watching those things over again. Sometimes I pick up on new details that I didn't notice before, depending on how well made it is, of course. But I never felt compelled to do that with Attack on Titan for some reason. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized maybe I don't really like this series after all. Then, of course, I saw the live-action movies, and those are garbage, but that's not really indicative of the original series. Even so, I wasn't really big on Attack on Titan, so something that's going to be taking so much inspiration from it already isn't going to appeal to me that much. But there was still potential for it to appeal in other areas. I wish I could say it did that, though. It doesn't. The major thing that separates Kaiju number 8 from Attack on Titan, aside from being set in the modern day and having sort of a weird biopunk aesthetic to the monsters, is that it's not a serious story. It is, in fact, an action comedy. I was actually kind of surprised by that. I wasn't expecting it to be a comedic story because, you look at the cover, you see that skull face, that dramatic red background, the rough way the title is written. That doesn't necessarily scream funny. That screams action-packed, that screams harrowing. It screams dramatic, but it doesn't really scream comedy. So imagine my surprise when it winds up playing out more like a comedic story. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I have seen some really bad kaiju comedies in the past, but I've seen some good ones as well. And for the record, because I know some people might try playing this card, I do understand how Japanese comedy works, especially when it comes to anime and manga. Some of my favorite anime and manga series are comedies. And I understand that there are differences between Japanese comedy and American comedy, just like there are differences between American comedy and British comedy and Indian comedy, and any other thing you can think of. Some comedic things are universal. I think pretty much everyone understands slapstick, but when it comes to other forms of comedy, I know the differences, I understand the differences, I can laugh at different kinds of humor from different cultures. That being said, I didn't really find Kaiju number 8 to be funny. The reason I don't find it funny is because it only has two kinds of humor in it, one of which gets used way more than the other. The primary form of comedy in this series is, let us call it the instant subversion. The basic idea is that you have a character and he's being very serious and he's saying something dramatic and saying that this is the way it needs to be and it's good that things are this way. And then another character, or maybe even that same character, will suddenly go, "No, that's not the way it is at all!" Very big and over the top and completely undercutting what was just said, destroying the dramatic moment. There's a bit of bathos in there, but it's not just straight up calling it bathos. That would be inaccurate. It's a very specific kind of thing that you find in this particular medium. And like I said, did I say it? Might have been in another take, but that kind of joke is not in and of itself a bad joke. When you use it the right way, have it timed just so, and mix it in with other forms of comedy, it can get a big laugh, even though it's a very basic kind of joke. The joke is that the drama was undercut. But the thing about Kaiju number 8 is that it uses that joke way too much. That is the primary way it tries to be funny. And when you have that happening so frequently, it gets stale really quick. By the end, it just was white noise, practically. I say that even though it's something I read, but you know what I mean. It didn't really resonate anymore. It wasn't funny, it was just sort of blah. I couldn't even call it cringe-inducing. And then there's the gross-out humor. Now, gross-out humor is definitely an acquired taste. There's clearly an audience for it because they keep making it, but you gotta do it a very particular way in order to make it work. You can't just show something disgusting and expect people to laugh. It's how you present the disgusting thing, or how you present people's reactions to the disgusting thing. That's what gets the laugh. At least in theory. But Kaiju number 8 has a little bit of gross out humor in it. And when I say that, I mean there are only like 2 major scenes where it happens. The first, as already mentioned, is when we see Kafka being dragged into the literal bowels of the monster to clean them out. And they say up front, imagine what you might find in that place and you know why he doesn't want to go there. But when we actually get to that place, it's all pixelated. We don't see what's there. And I'm not saying I want to see what's there. I mean, it is pixelated for a reason. I don't think anyone wants to see it. But that does kind of undercut the whole thing. Later, there's a scene where another character, whose name I can't be bothered to remember, also has his first day on the job getting dragged to clean out the bowels. We don't see him go in, we just see his expression afterward looking like he's trying to remain calm, but also like he's just stepped off a World War I battlefield. That's a little bit funnier, but it's a little more, I don't know, it just didn't really ring true when our one glimpse in there is deliberately censored. And then the other glimpse, we just sort of see the before and after. And then we have a scene that's kind of towards the end of Act 1, where Kafka has his first transformation into Kaiju number 8. He's panicking, he's running down the streets, he can't control his body, and he realizes he's got to take a leak. 2 problems, though. First, since he has no control over his body, he has no control over his bladder, so he's just gonna let it fly. But second problem, he doesn't know where it's going to come out of because this kaiju form has a completely different anatomy from what he's used to. And the joke winds up being that it comes out of his pecs. And then he gets embarrassed and says a non sequitur. I don't know. I get what the non sequitur means, mind you. It doesn't really make sense for him to say it in that moment. It's even acknowledged that it doesn't make sense to say it in that moment. And beyond that, the only thing we have left is that he peed out of a place that is unusual. And that's basically where the gross out humor ends. And I'm not saying I wanted more of it, but considering that the manga was willing to go to those places anyway, it's weird that there isn't more of it. It at least would have shaken things up a little. And that ultimately leaves the content, on the comedic side anyway, feeling very bland. And like I said, the rest of the story is basically just an also-ran version of Attack on Titan. So there's really not much there when you get right down to it. Lest you think I'm just being a negative Nelly, I did think that the actual design for Kaiju number 8 is interesting. The art is good, the Kaiju designs, as few as we see, they are neat to look at. Not necessarily the best looking Kaiju I've ever seen, but they have sort of an intentional ugliness to them. And there are varieties. You have the Kaiju, which are the really big ones, the Hanju, I believe, which are... wait. They say which one it is. Sorry, I'm gonna just look this up to be absolutely sure. Okay, I was right the first time. Hanju are the smaller kaiju that accompany the big one, and the Yoju are sort of the smaller, even smaller than that, humanoid creatures whose purpose has yet to be revealed, but it's teased towards the end what they might be doing. But anyway, that's an interesting idea and all. There are some interesting things in there, but I gotta mention the one last thing that left me feeling unsatisfied. And it might have been unavoidable at that. You see, the main pitch of this series is a man turns into a kaiju so he can fight other kaiju. That's the selling point. That's what audiences come to see. And this first volume doesn't really deliver that. I understand it's the beginning of the story, so you got to set up things. You got to establish who the characters are, what kind of world they live in, how Kafka gets his powers, and how he doesn't necessarily have control of them at first. But here's the thing. The chapters are really long, but most of the time spent in those chapters doesn't deliver on the main selling point. It doesn't deliver on the pitch. For the first chapter, Kafka doesn't have his abilities at all. He only gets them at the very end. Second chapter, he's just transformed, he's panicking, he can't control what he's doing. He comes across a Hanju that's attacking a house, pulls a Saitama and kills it in one hit, basically. And third chapter, he's somehow managed to shift back. We're never actually told how he managed to shift back or how he figured it out. We're not told anything or shown anything. And he's going to go and try out for the Defense Force again. And he's deliberately not using his powers to his advantage. Fourth chapter, he's still not using his powers to his advantage. He's just barely scraping by in the final thing. Then at the very end, the Hanju that they have in reserve for like a combat test are coming back. They're starting to attack everyone. Kafka transforms into Kaiju number 8 and says, "I'll take it from here." And that's it. The book ends. Right when it was about to deliver on the promise, it's over. And again, I realize it's just the first volume, but that means this first volume is all set up that concludes right when it was about to pay off. And that just leaves me feeling unsatisfied with how this whole book went. For contrast, there's another Kaiju manga that I'm currently reading, Kaiju Girl Carmelise. Similar premise of a human being who turns into a monster, only this time it's styled as a shoujo comedy. I actually think it works really well. I'll have to review that at some point. But I bring it up because with its first volume, which is actually shorter than the Kaiju number 8 first volume, it not only delivers two different instances in which the main character becomes a monster and goes on a rampage, but it also reaches a natural stopping point by the end of that book. So that even though you know there's more story coming, you can finish it, put it down and say, I'm satisfied for now, that'll hold me over until volume 2. Here, with Kaiju number 8, it's almost like they stopped it at a point where they felt like you would be obligated to buy volume number 2 in order to see what happens. Which, if that's the case, it's a cheap move. But if it's not the case, then it was just an unfortunate place to end. And you know, there's a chance that Volume 2 will deliver on the promise made in Volume 1, but then what was the point of Volume 1? Again, all set up without any real payoff. I just didn't end this book feeling satisfied, and I'm also not entirely sure I want to continue it anyway, because even if it had found a more natural stopping point, everything else in the book just didn't click with me. The comedy didn't make me laugh, the characters didn't draw me in, the art was good, but it wasn't enough to really wow me. I don't know, like I said, I've seen a lot of people talking about this series like it's the next great kaiju manga that you have to read, and I just don't understand why. I mean, is it possible I'm missing something? Sure. But having read the book, I don't know what it could possibly be. All I know is that I gave Kaiju number 8, Volume 1, its fair shot, and I just don't feel like it's worth continuing. I don't know. Maybe I will continue it, but right now I'm not feeling very compelled to, and I really don't understand what everyone was talking about. If you liked it and you feel like you can explain it to me somehow, feel free. I'm not entirely sure you'll be able to convince me, but you're welcome to try at least. But otherwise, I'm just feeling kind of hollow after this one. I'm just underwhelmed. That's the long and the short of it. Kaiju number 8 underwhelmed me, and I honestly feel like it lost out to a romantic comedy with the same premise. So I'm still going to read Kaiju Girl Carmelise. I've got all 4 volumes that are out so far and still waiting for volume 5. But for Kaiju number 8, I may pass this one up next time I'm in the bookstore. I don't know. We'll see. Those are my thoughts anyway. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books: Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.